I'm talking now about the Southeast Asian nations. This is chapter 30. I'm looking at page 903, Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia, these colonies were all let loose after World War II. In the case of Vietnam, it was with a big, long, bloody war. But other than that, they were all turned loose peacefully. The Dutch gave up Indonesia. The United States gave up the Philippines in 1946. And Great Britain gave up India. I mean, I've talked about that. And so, these Southeast Asian nations admired the West. And unlike India and Africa, they really wanted to copy the West and be like the West. So immediately they set up democratic constitutions. However, somehow they were not predisposed toward democracy, and they just cannot keep a democracy long. Inevitably, they will give up their democracy for a dictatorship, and I'm not saying they're wrong. Now, I'll give you an example. In Singapore, Singapore is one of the little tigers, which we'll mention later, but in Singapore they set up a democracy. And the lawlessness got so bad that if you wanted to go down to the store to buy a loaf of bread or a few little items of store, you'd better call all your neighbors and get together a posse and arm yourselves to teeth, and all of you walk down the store, because there might be somebody just coming out of every shadow. You only went out in the daytime. Nobody dared go out at night. Then Liu Yan took over as a dictator, and the first thing he did was clamp down hard on lawlessness. The people of Singapore loved him. Now, what do I mean that he clamped down hard? I mean literally clamped down. Persons who broke the law were punished by a type of whipping called a caning, where you were bent over a table, and some martial arts expert used a cane, a bamboo cane, to whip the daylights out of you, just so it could have burst open your skin. Now, if an American went to Singapore, and he was accused of spray painting a car. Now, he denies he did it, but then he was the young man's name was Michael Fay. Michael Fay was suffering from attention deficit disorder, which meant he was prone to do bad things. The Singapore government convicted him, and they sentenced him to 6 lashes with a cane. President Clinton called the Singapore president and reduced the sentence from 6 to 4. And Michael Fay was hit 4 times with a cane, sent to the hospital with bad bruises and blisters on his backside. Fay went home. He never went back to Singapore. But once home, he got in trouble again with the American law. But he never went back to Singapore. Wow. Now, you might think, don't the people of Singapore hate this? No, they love it. Today, it's said that in the land of Singapore, even the women can go for a stroll in the park at night. Nobody's afraid. When the Michael Fay incident came about, they took a poll and found out, folks, and this may surprise you, that 38% of Americans believe that we should resort to such means to get rid of the crime. You might say, you mean several of us favor public beatings? Here's why. A lot of Americans are tired of punk kids knocking over mailboxes, tearing off the antennas off our car. If you don't know what I mean, you will later. Coming in and tearing up our yard. The flower bed we work so hard on are coming in and hacking away at our bushes. Gangs getting together and recruiting even your child or mine into their gang and saying if you don't conform, I mean, they set before what's a draft. Many of you have any idea what I'm talking about? Maybe one of you. So I'm nodding your head. This goes on in America, and a lot of people are getting sick and tired of the crime. They had the same problem. Now, Philippines, same thing. As soon as the Philippines got to independence, they set up an American-style democracy. It didn't work. Lawlessness ran rampant. Then a dictator took over named Marcos. Now, unlike the Singapore dictator, Marcos was somewhat corrupt. He eventually was ousted. As for the Singapore dictator, Liu Yan, he retired and passed it on to his son. The thing about it is both the father and son were never accused of any type of moral corruption. They were able to keep their hands out of the public pocketbook. And, oh yeah, they killed a few people, but they were people who generally deserved to be killed. And they didn't kill without due process. It was not a reign of terror. The bad people living in Singapore learned this. They either changed their ways where they left Singapore. In the case of Michael Fay, he left and never went back. Hi. Okay. All right, anyway, they've not been able to keep a democracy long, and yet now, you might think these people are really bad folk. No, compared to what the people of Africa and the people of India have done, they have done remarkably well. They're notorious for their hard work, family values, and in general, clean living. And the result is they have generally prospered. Not quite with, perhaps with American-style prosperity, but in general, they have done well. And again, it's the values of a strong family life, hard work, and saving that has led them to, like I say, mostly do well. In the case of Indonesia, I was surprised to learn one time that Indonesia is the number 5 in population of every country in the world. China is number 1. India is number 2. Now the Soviet Union was once number 3, but the Soviet Union moved down. So I think the United States is number 3 and Russia number 4 with Indonesia number 5. Something like that. The Soviet Union broke up and lost a lot of its people, so it now lags behind the United States in population. But Indonesia consists of a whole bunch of scattered islands right off the southern coast of Asia, between Asia and Australia. There were 2 leaders, and don't try to memorize their names. The one name is Sukarno and the other is Suharto. I mean, hey, I know their names, but which one was which? Well, whatever. Sukarno, I think, was the first one. He called his the guided democracy. He said, you people do have a democracy, but I'm at the head and I'm guiding you toward democracy. Hey, folk, a guided democracy is almost like an honest thief or a truthful liar. If it's guided, it's not a democracy. And if it's a democracy, it's not guided. But basically, he was saying, I'm a democracy and a dictator also. Now, something interesting occurred during his reign. The people there were afraid that the communists were going to take over, and instead of calling for the United States to help drive out the communists, or calling on the UN to help, they rose up and they killed more than 100,000 communists, and they overthrew Sukarno. This is on page 905. And communism has never, ever made a comeback in Indonesia. Again, they did it all by themselves, no help from outside. And most of the people they killed were Chinese, who the people of Indonesia suspected were communists and were suspicious of them. What's that?
Who's killing?
The people of Indonesia. It wasn't Sukarno. In fact, they overthrew him, so they could get to the Persians. And they rose up and decided the way to solve the communism problem was just to kill them all. Again, that's not politically correct, but they did it. And again, it's better, if you're going to get rid of communism that way, it's better it was done by the people, a big popular uprising, than if it were done by a government mandate, because that way would turn the people against the government. No, they couldn't blame the government. The government didn't do it. It was a popular uprising that killed a whole bunch of foreigners, mostly Chinese, whom they said were communists, and a lot of them probably were. In other words, they said, the Dutch left us, and you Chinese aren't going to take over us. And yeah, after that, they deposed Sukarno and put up Suharto. Suharto was to rule Indonesia until 2008. All right. Now, of all the countries in the southeast that Most of them accepted Western ways and Western culture. The one exception was Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh was determined to make Vietnam into a communistic country, but when that failed, and folk everywhere where communism has been tried has failed, when that failed, they, like other communistic countries, they somewhat became more capitalistic. Folk communism seems to me like it's just designed to fail. Socialism, same thing. Communism is a more extreme form, but it just simply doesn't work, has not. And the nations that tried it, whether it be Russia or China or Cuba, have wound up opening up their people to have small plots of land for themselves, or small businesses or small stores, just so they'll have some incentive to get out and work. Socialism destroys that incentive. Everybody knows, hey, if I work hard, I'm not going to get rewarded for my work, so why work? Oh yeah, the other exception was Myanmar. Vietnam did not adopt Western ways, and neither did Myanmar. And that is strange because Myanmar, or once it was called Burma, was one of those countries that had not been conquered because they had adopted they had westernized. Then when the other nations started to westernize, they simply refused. There are some things about Western culture that is somewhat anathema to their way of life. And one thing, of course, lately it's the permissiveness they see in the United States. And just yesterday in the class, yesterday's class, we discussed that these people from abroad see the way Americans live and they think, hey, I wouldn't want to copy that. So much so that Alexander Solzhenitsyn wound up going back to Russia after Russia collapsed rather than live in the United States because he couldn't stand the decadence. Myanmar has a complete dictatorship with not even a pretense of democracy. And interesting enough, there was a big storm that hit Myanmar a few years back. And of course, as is our custom, the United States offered to send aid, and the government of Myanmar said, no, you Americans just stay home. We don't want you over here because you'd only come here on a pretext of helping us, but you'd actually be spying on us. So a lot of the Americans stayed home. Now, Cambodia. Cambodia was for many years run by a man named Pol Pot. I told you I'd mention him later, and yeah, it is later, all right. But anyway, Pol Pot went to France and studied the Enlightenment. And some of the Enlightenment philosophers said that the problem with mankind was civilization corrupted mankind ought to go back to the way he lived like when he was an animal. That man is really an animal and should live like one. So Pol Pot went back to Cambodia and he began to try to revert his people back to the primitive ways, even more primitive than they'd been before. So basically he executed 1/7 of his population, and folks, this sounds gory, but on page 909, you see several shells there of bones, skulls, femurs, just bones. He killed 1/7 of the population, just slaughtered them. Anyone who wore glasses, automatic execution. Anyone who was educated. So what the people there did in order to survive, they started dressing in rags to make themselves look primitive, and pretending to be ignorant, talking like they were uneducated, even if they were, in order to survive. Some people escaped, and one person who escaped went to the UN and told the UN what Pol Pot was doing. He was killing 1/7 of his population, killing at least 1 million of his people. just for the crime of looking civilized or being civilized. The United Nations did absolutely nothing about it, and of all people, finally, Vietnam, the nation who had defeated us, sent their army in and overthrew Pol Pot. Pol Pot went into the deep jungle where he was to live for many years, and finally the report came out of the jungle that he had died. Now, yesterday, we had an interesting discussion. The subject came up about Hitler's killing of 15 million of his own people, Saddam Hussein killing at least 1 million of his own people. We have not discussed Pol Pot yet, but at least 2 or 3 of the more outspoken students in the class said that any government that wants to has any right to do anything it wants to its own people. There's no such thing as basic human rights. And what right does any outsider have to interfere with the internal workings of an individual government? If any of you want to comment, you will.
I don't think that should happen. Like, for example, my country, I'm from Brazil. I don't agree with the government being corrupt and stealing all the tax money. We're like the #1 tax country in the world, and our country sucks because they steal the money and they don't use the money for making roads, stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like, I don't agree with the government being able to do whatever they want. And the people there, they can't do anything because, you know, they will go to jail.
Then are you hoping that some outsider will come in, some outside influence, possibly not, and tell the Brazilian government you either shape up or we'll quit trading with you or something?
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that. Well, I'm glad you said that, because my reply was, I said, I don't want to argue with you. My reply was, what if they come after me? Would I want someone to come and assist me? What if they come to kill me and my family? Would I care? Or what if, I said, what if they come after you and you're not immune? Would you